Peace to everyone out there. This is the Political Brown Kid here on a Wednesday, February 21st. And I just want to drop this little bit of information on you. Just been checking out the news. Actually, it was last night I checked it out and found out. Probably it's been in the news before. But also been doing some research online a little bit. In Maryland, in the state of Maryland, there's a mall in Columbia, Maryland. They're now implementing a policy which will require all teenagers, 17 years, 17. I want to emphasize that, 17 years of age and younger. So anybody under the age of 18, you're going to need to be supervised. Walk through the mall by your mommy and your daddy. Apparently this mall is owned by Brookfield Properties. They also own a mall in Towson, Maryland, which is further north, a little bit, I guess about 20 minutes north or 30 minutes north of that one. And that mall has already had a policy where people under the age of 18 need to be supervised by their mommy and daddy. So your mom and daddy's going to break out that leash that they used to have for you back in the day, that they used to put on their wrist and put on your wrist, that little rubber leash. And they're going to start walking you through the mall because you don't know how to act. Apparently that's according to the property owners. But get this property owner, I'm assuming they're a REIT, Brookfield Properties. So I'm assuming that they're a real estate investment trust, publicly traded. I could be wrong on that. They also own a mall in Northern Virginia, Tyson's Corner. They're not planning on implementing that feature there. They're saying, let the kids have that mall and run free. And I'm going to tell you guys why if you're not familiar with the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And let me just say this too. History doesn't repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. And what I mean by that is I remember as a Generation X person growing up, being about in my teenage years, when we walked the mall, if there was more than three, and this is a true fact, if there were more than three black males walking in the mall together, the mall security would come and split you up. They would say only two of y'all can walk together. The other person has to walk with the other, has to break up. And we would be like, and literally this happened to me. And we were like, well, why are you breaking us up? Because there was about 5 of us in a group, I think one time we went to the mall. And of course, in Generation X, that's what you did. You rode bicycles, you walked the mall to get telephone numbers or just to socialize. And that was the thing that you did in the 80s and 90s. And probably even the 70s, but I was too young in the 70s. But they split me and my group of my 4 other friends up. They made 3 of us walk together and the other 2 walk, so we had to kind of talk to each other from, we kind of walked on one side and the other ones walked in parallel on the other side. And we just kind of talked to each other. But while the security guard was breaking us up, we're telling them, well, look at those group of white guys over there. And it was about 6 or 7 of them. And we said, y'all not breaking them up. And they knew they were wrong because they didn't even provide a response to that question. So they weren't going to provide a response to that question because they probably, number one, they said, we don't need to answer to you young kids. And number 2, we don't have an answer for that. We're just targeting you. And so here you're targeting in Maryland. And number 1, too, this is going to be the difference between the state of Maryland and the state of Virginia. You have to understand the state of Maryland is a blue state. In the state of Virginia, you can say, especially Northern Virginia is relatively blue, but you can probably say Virginia as a whole, it's going to be more, they're going to have more conservative, they're going to have a more conservative approach. Plus, you're dealing with Tyson's Corner, Virginia, which is a pretty affluent area. And so I'm bringing that up to say this. That's why I say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So now they're targeting 17-year-olds. But you got to understand that state of Virginia is saying, hey, look, our rich, because Northern Tyson's Corner, Virginia is a rich area. And even though now they have a subway for most kids to come to, because back in the day, Virginia, I can tell you this for a fact, Tyson's Corner fought having a subway for a long time because they didn't want people, inner city people from DC, those southeast, northeast, northwest, and Southwest kids, they didn't want them coming to Tyson's Corner and hanging out there. So they fought that for a long time. And the reason why now there's an explosion of metro in the area is because now the rich people want more walkability. They want more public transportation. But in that area, still, they don't really have too much problems in that mall, aside from one, I think, quote unquote, rapper actually having a shootout in the mall in, I think, 2022. But for the most part, Virginia's not going to levy that on their kids. They're not going to be that prescriptive with their kids because of a few other kids acting up. And this is Maryland and a property development going there. And mind you, again, this property owner, Brookfield, they own the 3 malls. They own 2 malls in Maryland, which they are saying that the 17-year-olds need to have be escorted. So they're levying that to the Maryland malls, but not to the Virginia mall. So I would have to assume that Virginia legislation probably is deterring them from doing so. Or the Virginia community is deterring them from doing so. And I'm also assuming that they're looking at it from a perception base. And maybe it's also too, because I haven't really heard too much trouble, because Columbia is actually a relatively nice area. Towson is a decent area. It's decent. But, Columbia is pretty decent too. But you're going to have more colorful people in those locations as well. And it's not as affluent as Tyson's Corner, Virginia. And also, too, again, 2 of those malls that they're levying it on is in Maryland, the liberal state. And we know how liberals can sometimes be very extreme sometime in their policy. When in fact, sometimes they say we're more forgiving and more open, but sometimes they can go to some extremes, as Bill Clinton and the super felons or the super predators, and that whole 3 strikes and everything. Sometimes we can go too far. But you have to ask yourself this too. So now, because of a few kids acting up and the mall doesn't want to implement more security in the mall, and I get it, sometimes kids act up, grown people act up. A lot of grown people act up. But you're going to start punishing kids, specifically kids when you hit that age of 16, 17 years of age. Those are your transitioning years. I encourage, like with my children, when they turn 16, I encourage them to get their driver's license. And it's not because I want my kids driving all over God's earth and, going a lot of places, because you worry about your kids when they're in the streets, but it's just a rite of transition to independence. And it shows that progression, and it helps with them to progress. Even if you don't have anything to drive, just get your driver's license, because you never know. I'd rather you have it and not need it to use it than need to have a driver's license and not have one. And similarly, when you're looking at a 16, 17-year-old kid, those are the years that you're starting to prepare yourself to transition to adulthood when you turn 18. And you need some of these independences where you can go to the mall by yourself and you can shop. These are the basic things that you have to do in life. So what, you're going to now start banning kids from the supermarket? And what if this kid needs to eat and take care of themselves? You're going to start banning kids from going into CVS stores and going into definitely 7-Elevens and convenience stores, which kids is, they're known to go in groups and do a grab and dash in there. But we can't start prohibiting kids because of a few kids acting up. We have to take other measures such as security, surveillance, I guess. But to deny a kid that right to transition to adulthood, because now here you got a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds. So what you're saying is these kids, they're good enough to probably work in my mall. They're good enough to work in my department stores. They're good enough to work in the food court, but somebody's going to have to escort them to the food court and then escort them out of the food court. Or you're going to say, well, that's different. When they're working, they can be here. But when they're not working, we don't want them here. That's similar to maids and, support staff being able to work at a 5-star restaurant or 5-star hotel, but they can't afford to be a patron there. It's kind of not right. And that's the way that I'm looking at it. And then also when you look at it again on the flip side, here's this mall in Northern Virginia, in pretty much the tech corridor of Virginia, down in the tech corridor, that whole area has a bunch of contracting buildings that make hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of dollars off of the DOD, the Pentagon, and State Department, and all of those other federal buildings in Washington, D.C., and they make all that good money, and they're able to support their life in that Northern Virginia area. If you go down to Tyson's area, McLean, and that whole area down there, it's very affluent, but they're not levying that on those kids that live out there. Just something for you to think about. Just wanted to drop this knowledge on you for today. This is the Political Brown Kid. Leave me some comments, like and subscribe. I'm out of here.